Yay, you guys, it's Mrs. Klein.
Who's in for a podcast? It's Mrs. Wolbrin.
Okay,
And we're going to start with Lesson 15, Manifest Destiny and the Growing Nation. Your guiding question for this next unit or lesson is how justifiable was U.S. expansion in the 1800s?
okay, you guys, there's also some vocabulary terms that you're going to want to make sure you know. They are annex, diplomacy, manifest destiny, the Mexican-American War, territory, and Texas War for Independence.
Okay, let's get started. So, more than 150 years ago, the phrase manifest destiny inspired great hopes and dreams among many Americans. It led to a war with Mexico and it changed the map of the United States.
Manifest destiny means obvious fate. John O'Sullivan, a New York newspaper editor, first used the phrase in 1845 when he wrote that it was the United States' manifest destiny to overspread and to possess the whole of the continent. Looking at the land beyond the Rocky Mountains, he argued that Americans had a divine right to settle this area and make it their own.
The fact that Great Britain claimed part of this land, a huge area known as Oregon, made no difference to O'Sullivan. After all, the United States had stood up to Great Britain in the War of 1812.
O'Sullivan was also unimpressed by Mexico's claim to much of the West. Like many Americans of the time, he believed that the United States had a duty to extend the blessings of democracy to new lands and peoples. It was God's plan, he believed, for Americans to expand their great experiment of liberty.
When Americans began their great experiment in 1776, the idea that the United States might one day spread across the continent seemed like a dream. By 1848, however, the dream was a reality. In this lesson, you'll learn how the United States tripled its size in a little more than a single lifetime.
Holy moly, tripled it, dang. All right, manifest destiny took many forms, with the United States expanding through treaties, settlement, and war. As you read, think about how each new area was acquired and whether the decisions that led to the U.S. expansion across North America were justifiable or not.
Okay. And we're going to start with talking about the Louisiana Territory.
Finally, the Louisiana Purchase.
Woohoo! So, guys, we're like taking a step back now. Oh, sorry, announcement.
Mr. Heinen will be calling the office in a moment. All right, back to Louisiana.
Okay, we're taking a step back in time, back to when Jefferson was president.
Yay!
And we're going to talk about the Louisiana Territory.
Yes.
All right. The nation's first opportunity for expansion during the early 1800s involved the vast territory to the west of the Mississippi River, then known as Louisiana. The United States wanted possession of the port city of New Orleans, near the mouth of the Mississippi River. By 1800, thousands of farmers were settling land to the west of the Appalachian Mountains. To get their crops to market, they floated them down the Mississippi to New Orleans, and from there, the crops were shipped to Europe or to other cities on the East Coast.
All right, across the Mississippi River lay the unexplored territory of Louisiana. This immense region stretched from Canada in the north to Texas in the south, and from the Mississippi, it reached west all the way to the Rocky Mountains.
Now, at the time, the French owned this territory.
Yes, they did.
And Napoleon had plans for Louisiana and hoped to settle the territory with thousands of French farmers who would then raise food for the slaves who worked on France's sugar plantations in the Caribbean. However, Napoleon's plans alarmed frontier farmers. New Orleans was part of Louisiana, and if Napoleon closed the port to American goods, farmers would have no way to get their crops to market.
All right, so we needed that control of the river, we needed that port. All right, so then a noble bargain gets decided. President Thomas Jefferson understood the concerns of American farmers. In 1803, he sent James Monroe to France with an offer to buy New Orleans, just the city of New Orleans, for $7.5 million. But by the time Monroe reached France, Napoleon had changed his plans.
Yeah. Now, this is odd because we've already talked about Monroe being president. At this time, he's Jefferson's Secretary of State. Okay. So France and Great Britain were on the brink of war. Napoleon knew that he might lose Louisiana to the British. So rather than lose Louisiana, it made sense to sell it to the United States.
Napoleon's offer to sell all of Louisiana stunned James Monroe. Instead of a city, suddenly the United States had the opportunity to buy an area as big as itself.
It did not take long for Monroe to agree. And on April 30th, 1803, he signed a treaty giving Louisiana to the United States in exchange for $15 million.
All right. Now, to most Americans, the Louisiana Purchase looked like the greatest land deal in history. The new territory would double the country's size at a bargain price of just about 2 or 3 cents an acre.
Still, not everyone approved. Some people worried that such a large country would be impossible to govern.
Others, objected to the $15 million price tag, with one Boston critic writing, "We are to give money of which we have too little for land for which we already have too much."
Mm-hmm. Opponents also accused Jefferson of tearing the Constitution to tatters. They said that the Constitution made no provision for purchasing foreign territory. Jefferson was troubled by the argument that the Louisiana Purchase was unconstitutional, but he still believed it was better to stretch the limits of the Constitution than to lose a historic opportunity.
So he's kind of reversing his position, because remember, he was a strict constructionist.
Yeah.
Okay, right? No, you can't open the bank, Alexander Hamilton. Okay, but now he's stretching the Constitution so that he can make these purchases.
Right, now he's pulling an Alexander
Hamilton. Yeah, there you
Hamilton.
go, exactly. All right, so late in 1803, the Senate voted to ratify the Louisiana Treaty. Okay, all right, and in 1804, Meriwether Lewis and William Clark led an expedition to explore the newly acquired territory.
Okay, now the next territory we're going to talk about is Florida.
Yep.
Okay, because this whole section is about the United States expanding.
Yep.
So, having acquired Louisiana through diplomacy, President Jefferson turned next to Florida.
In 1804, Jefferson sent 2 diplomats to Spain to buy Florida, but Spain's answer was no deal.
As Spain's control of Florida weakened over the next few years, its government could do nothing to stop the raids on farms in Georgia by Seminoles and ex-slaves.
All right, now we're going to go a little bit now we're going to talk about Andrew Jackson again. So Andrew Jackson is invading Florida. This is before he's president of the United States. Okay, all right. In 1818, President James Monroe sent Andrew Jackson, the hero of the Battle of New Orleans, to Georgia with orders to end the raids. Jackson was told that he could chase raiding Seminoles into Florida, but he did not have the authority to invade the Spanish colony.
Okay, now, of course, Jackson's not going to listen.
No, he's not a rule follower.
No, he does it his own way.
All right.
So despite his orders, Jackson marched into Florida with a force of 1,700 troops.
Fearing war, President Monroe asked his cabinet for advice.
Secretary of State John Quincy Adams, who convinced Monroe to send a blunt message to Spain. The message was, govern Florida properly or get out.
All right. Equally fearful of war, Spain decided to get out. In 1819, the Spanish government agreed to yield Florida to the United States. In exchange, the United States agreed to pay $5 million in settlers' claims against Spain and to honor Spain's longtime claims to Texas. We're going to move on and learn a little bit about how the United States acquired Oregon. Okay, all right, so this is all about the Oregon country. Far to the northwest of Texas lay Oregon country, an enormous tree-covered wilderness that stretched from the Rocky Mountains all the way to the Pacific Ocean. All right. In 1819, Oregon was claimed by 4 nations: Russia, Spain, Great Britain, and the United States. Spain was the first to drop out of the scramble when it gave up its claim to Oregon as a part of the treaty to purchase Florida. Russia also dropped out.
That left Great Britain and the United States. For the time being, the 2 nations agreed to a peaceful joint occupation of Oregon.
Okay, all right, but then all of a sudden people started discovering Oregon. So the United States claim to Oregon was based on the Lewis and Clark expedition. Between 1804 and 1806, Meriwether Lewis and William Clark had led a small band of explorers to the Oregon coast.
And then in 1824, a young fur trapper named Jedediah Smith found a passage through the Rocky Mountains called South Pass.
Unlike the high, steep passes used by Lewis and Clark, South Pass was low and flat enough for wagons to use in crossing the Rockies. Now the way was open for settlers to seek their fortunes in Oregon.
The first American settlers to travel through South Pass to Oregon were missionaries. These missionaries made few converts among Oregon's Indians, but their glowing reports of Oregon's fertile soil and towering forests soon attracted more settlers.
All right, these early settlers wrote letters home describing Oregon as a pioneer's paradise.
And reports like these inspired other settlers who were looking for a new beginning.
The Oregon fever has broke out, reported one observer, and is now raging.
Okay, so all of Oregon or half. Along with Texas, Oregon fever played a role in the 1844 presidential campaign. Polk won the election with such stirring slogans as "All of Oregon or None" and "5440 or Fight." Polk promised he would not rest until the United States had annexed all of Oregon country.
However, Polk did not want Oregon enough to risk starting a war with Great Britain. Instead, he agreed to a compromise treaty that divided Oregon roughly in half at the 49th parallel, which now marks the western border between the United States and Canada.
Okay. And
Polk got neither 5440 nor a fight. What he got was a diplomatic settlement that both the United States and Great Britain could accept without spilling a drop of blood.
And that is it for this podcast. So see ya.
That was fun. Let's do it again sometime.